Hey guys, so we will be looking at principles of design and covering the remaining principles. Our next principle is balance. Visual weight is a term that is used to refer to the tendency of shapes to float or sink in an image, and it also refers to the relative importance of an element in a design. And I will speak about it further, referencing images just a bit later on. Here you have two images. The one on the left is a photograph and the one on the right is a painting. Now, the one on the left is a black and white photograph of New York City, and it is a very good example showing the power of orientation. Now, just to recap, orientation refers to either the landscape, vertical or diagonal position of any shape or even of an image altogether. And in this case, the orientation is vertical, and that vertical format, it really brings out the dramatic nature of the tall buildings, and it accentuates the height of these skyscrapers, and as a result, it captures the soaring energy of Wall Street. The image on the right, however, is made up of horizontal lines, the soft blue palette, along with the soft yellow and soft grays and black. And the combination of the vertical format of this painting with the horizontal lines in it, they add stability to the image, and it also reflects the expansive feel of the sky. So you can compare the moods between the two images by looking at their orientation and the position of the elements within them. Now here you have a photograph of New Mexico. And the first thing that your eye notices is the moon against the black sky. And that moon holds the most visual weight in the entire photograph, regardless of its small size. But the fact that it's positioned, this white form is positioned against this black velvety sky, and it's above the cityscape, gives it the most prominence and therefore makes it the strongest element in the entire photo. And in fact, it is the first thing that your eye notices. It pulls us into the image. So the image is peaceful and yet dramatic at the same time. And the horizontal lines under the moon, under the clouds, and in the city at the bottom, they all add to the stability of the photograph. Visual weight is influenced by the following compositional forces: size, value, type of shape, texture, location, and orientation. Symmetrical balance occurs when shapes are mirrored on either side of an axis. Here you have two examples, where in the top one, if you draw a line down the middle, the left and the right mirror each other perfectly. And in diagram B, when you draw a line horizontally in the middle, the top and the bottom mirror each other perfectly as well. So these are examples of images that reflect symmetrical balance. The Taj Mahal is a perfect example of a piece of architecture that also speaks of symmetrical balance. When you draw a line down the middle of the structure, even down this waterway, it is a perfect mirror image from left to right and right to left. Approximate symmetry is created when similar imagery appears on either side of a central axis. So it won't be perfectly symmetrical, but it is similar. And this photograph is an example. Now, when you look at this photograph, the first thing that your eye would tell you is that it is symmetrical, because you will notice the pole on the curb, and then you will notice the pole reflected in the glass, and your eye tells you, okay, it is being mirrored on both sides, it is therefore a symmetrical image. But when you start noticing the details, you'll notice that it isn't actually. You'll see this glass that's coming towards you with its dark reflections, and then you'll see the diagonal lines, for instance, that metallic piece under the glass that actually takes you back into the photograph. And these seemingly symmetrical shapes are actually different, and your eyes slowly start to adjust and notice that. And then they slowly create a very disorienting image as a result, and it becomes a bit unnerving. So rather than seeming to be a very serene image, which is the effect that symmetrical images normally give, this actually does the opposite. Radial symmetry occurs when lines and shapes are mirrored both vertically and horizontally. The center of the composition serves as a focal point. So here you have two images where the images can be divided vertically and horizontally on the left and on the right. It has a focal point. So these are examples of images that use radial symmetry. Asymmetrical balance creates equilibrium among visual elements that do not mirror each other on either side of the axis. I'll give you an example. So here you have 4 diagrams. In image A, you have a small square at the edge of the ledge, and then you have a large square very close to the triangle. It reminds you of a seesaw. And these images are basically to give you an idea of how small shapes can be balanced with large shapes in an image in an asymmetrical manner. Okay. Now in diagram B, you have the small square multiplied 3 times. So you have a cluster of 3 squares, and then you have the large square slightly positioned a little bit back as compared to image A. It goes to show you the weight that these small squares hold and how the large square actually has to balance it off by moving a little bit back. Again, an example of how asymmetrical balance is being achieved. And then in image C, you have a tiny black square, but because it is a color black, it holds more weight. And it is being balanced off by a large circle, but the circle is empty, it is white. So a small black square balances a big white circle perfectly. And then in image D, you have a white square at the edge of the seesaw being balanced off by a textured square, but the textured square is not on the opposing edge at the end. It is actually closer to the triangle. So it is kind of reflecting the weight of the white square, and it's sort of balancing out the heaviness that the textured square is trying to create. Here's another example of achieving asymmetrical balance. In diagram A, you have a small black square at the bottom left of the composition, and then you have this big black rectangle, but it's almost exiting the composition. In image B, in contrast, the small square moves down to the edge of the sheet and the rectangle is brought into the white space of the sheet. So it's sort of saying that the small black square is heavier than it was in image A, and therefore the big rectangle needs to be brought back a little bit inside. So they're both balancing each other off. And then in image C, the square is multiplied 3 times. And so the artist felt that it was okay to make the position of the large rectangle diagonal to balance out the multiplicity of the 3 squares. And then in image D, you have a triangular shape, which is a much more dynamic shape compared to the square. It's black in color. And therefore, the designer felt that it was okay to balance it off with a black, static, rectangular shape. Here is a painting by Piet Mondrian, and this is again a perfect example of how colors have been balanced in an asymmetrical manner. You have a bright yellow square at the top left of a painting. You can see the entire shape, but then to sort of diffuse its potency, a small blue slim rectangle has been added to the bottom of the painting. So blue is a heavier color, it's a darker color. You're not seeing as much of it as you would see of the yellow, but that strip is enough to balance off the power of the yellow. Scale and proportion is another principle of design. Proportion refers to the relative size of elements within an image, and scale refers to the size of a form when compared with our human size. Here you have a poster with an environmental message, and you have the image divided into black and white spaces, top and bottom. but you can see the tension between the black and the white, and you can see the white extending into the black area through letters. And similarly, you can see the black pushing down into the white space with the letter save. And this contrast of black and white and the tension between them is adding to the urgency of this message related to our environment. Rhythm is a sense of movement created by the repetition of several units in a deliberate pattern. This is another very important principle of design. So here on the left, you have patterns being repeated, which are reminiscent of undulating waves in water. And on the right, you have vibrant words being repeated in different colors, and they create spatial rhythm as a result. Some words are advancing forward because of their color, while some are receding into space. Emphasis, another important principle of design, gives prominence to a particular part of a design. A focal point is a device used to create emphasis in a composition. Emphasis by isolation. It refers to an anomaly or a break from the norm in a design that tends to stand out. An isolated or mismatched element in a design catches our attention. Emphasis by placement. The placement of a selected shape can increase its importance in a design. Here is an example of an image where emphasis is used. When you look at it, the first thing that pulls your eye towards the image is actually the eye in the image, okay? And the tones and concentric circles around the eye, they pull us inward and then outward. And the fragments of text are also sort of extending outward, so our eyes move sideways throughout the image as well. So the image seems to be continually compressing and expanding, simultaneously pulling us in and out by putting emphasis first on the eye and then your eyes observing all the different elements around it. Emphasis through contrast. This occurs when two or more forces oppose one another in a composition. So here are examples where in diagram A, it shows emphasis by contrasting static with dynamic. You have a static set of squares contrasted by this small square that is rebelling by being in a diagonal position. And then there's emphasis through contrast in diagram B shown through scale, small square versus large square. And then in diagram C, it's solid square versus a textured square. And then in diagram D, it's a curvilinear shape, which is a circle, against rectilinear shapes, which is a bunch of rectangles and squares. Here's an example of contrast in scale. A small sky and a small moon positioned against a very large figure of a child and his teddy bear. And this image is a take on possibly dreams taking flight, and it's a very surrealistic and dreamy image. The one on the top shows an example of contrasts occurring through shape. So you have this large figure that captures your attention through its body language, and suddenly your eye notices the small note on the right, and that piece of paper gains power and balances the large figure on the left. And then there's contrast in color in the final image, which is a scene from Schindler's List. Midway through a black and white film, the red color appears defining an emotional part of the film.